Hello and welcome to Roundtable. Is China looking to Russia and Ukraine as it decides what to do about Taiwan? Equally, is Taiwan looking at Ukrainian resistance if it has to defend itself? Taiwan says China has used military drills around the island to prepare for an invasion. So what lessons in particular can the islanders use to repel any attack if it comes to that? Glad you could join us. I'm David Foster. In the United States, Republicans and Democrats are pretty much united in their support for Taiwan. Analysts, though, say Taiwan is being used to strategically contain the rise of China. So when the U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan, it triggered a strong response from China. However, the U.S. President, Joe Biden, is not too alarmed by China's reaction.
I'm not worried, but I'm concerned that they're moving as much as they are. But I don't think they're going to do anything more.
In the same week, Taiwan conducted artillery drills simulating a defense of the island. Defense analysts are drawing parallels to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which began in similar fashion. Has Putin's closest ally, China, been inspired to also expand its territory by invading Taiwan? And what lessons can the Taiwanese learn from Ukraine to prepare for this? And we head to Taiwan, to the capital Taipei, and say hello to Ross Feingold, Asia political risk analyst. Also in the same city, Ting Liu, foreign affairs and military correspondent for TVBS News. And Dnipro in Ukraine, and we see Alexei Izhak, head of department at the National Institute for Strategic Studies in Dnipro. We'll come to Taiwan in just a moment, if we may, but you may be interested to hear what Alexei has to say, because my first question is going to be, since February and the start of the Russian invasion, what has Ukraine learned that it could perhaps benefit Taiwan to be listening to?
Ukraine learned, first of all, that we had to be much better prepared and not to ignore signals of possible invasion. In practical terms, to my view, the main thing was to be prepared in terms of internal influences, in terms of possible betrayal from some officials in Ukraine and in security apparatus and in military. This is the first thing, not to be influenced internally by aggressor, by intruder.
So just to be clear, you need to watch out for those people who are bad influences at home.
Yes, at our home, not just influencers. There are a lot of people in position in Ukraine. There was a lot of people in positions in Ukraine. There comes to be spies or maybe just influences, but their influence had very severe consequences. Maybe the most losses of territory of Ukraine in first days, it was because of betrayal, internal betrayal. It's my view. There is no still confident proofs, but it seems it was the case.
So internal betrayal,
at least in south of Ukraine.
In the first 48
yes,
hours.
Internal betrayal.
Ting, let me ask you this. The first 48 hours did not go as well as Vladimir Putin had perhaps expected. Is Taiwan well aware of this and therefore, as Alexei is saying, much better prepared?
I think comparing the Russian-Ukrainian war versus a possible future unimaginable attack from the PRC towards Taiwan, definitely there are many lessons for Taiwan to learn. So I think one thing very key from the Russian-Ukrainian war is that how prepared the Ukrainians are and the lessons they learned from the annexation of Crimea. So they had actually 8 years to prepare for any potential attack from the Russians. So, we have been seeing many active civil defense training, relieve a lot of things happening on the ground. And currently in Taiwan, there are actually many discussions towards that. So, from the Taiwanese Defense Ministry side, there are discussions on how to whether, they should actually prolong the current military conscription for the males, because it is currently at 4 months, which is definitely seen as inadequate. They are thinking about.
And is that likely to happen? Is it likely to
be
be increased to 12 months, as has been suggested?
It actually takes a lot of time, and currently the ruling government has not given a very clear direction, because, no doubt this will be in direct relations. It may affect their votes, but, given how the situation is developing, from what I know is that there are actually discussions happening at very high levels right now. And on top of that, currently there's also a lot of practice for the civil defense training from on the ground side.
It is an irony, Ross, is it not, that in a democratically elected government such as the one in Taiwan, they're worried about increasing something like reserve time in the military and national service because they might lose favor, when in fact that could be a very good thing to defend themselves with.
It's been a struggle for many years here in Taiwan. Going back to the martial law era, the military just doesn't have a very good reputation, frankly. And over the years, as Taiwan's economy took off, people travel more, people seeking a better quality of life, there was a lot of demand to reduce the amount of mandatory national service. It was steadily decreased, and now it's a 4-month, very light training. Nobody believes it's serious training. But on the other hand, there's great reluctance to increase it, whether political or, frankly, from the military as well, because they would have to accommodate a large number of young troops coming in for extended periods of training. And they don't really have the non-commissioned officers or the bases, the capacity to suddenly have so many troops. Frankly, they wouldn't know what to do with them.
Except defend their territory. But let me come back to you, if I may, in just a moment, Ting Ting, after we've heard from the number 2 at the Chinese Foreign Ministry.
The U.S. cannot represent the whole world. China has warned the U.S. well in advance that should Pelosi visit Taiwan, it would cause a crisis and major disruptions to China-U.S. exchange and cooperation. Unfortunately, the U.S. side ignored that and went ahead with the visit. The Taiwan question at the very heart of China's core interests. The United States, while undermining China's core interests, is asking for China's cooperation where they need it. What kind of logic is this? China's decision to cancel or suspend cooperation in some areas does not come without warning. We say what we mean and mean what we say.
The important word I think he uses there, Ting Ting, is crisis. And I put that into the context of China saying very recently that it's withdrawing its promise not to send troops after what it believes will be the reunification of Taiwan with mainland China. So China's saying, well, hang on, we could have troops on the island, even if we take it peacefully. This person's talking about a crisis. How is it viewed where you are?
No, in Taiwan, people are actually looking at the latest released white paper from the PRC government. And know that, as you pointed out, that line where actually previously they promised they would not send any troops or administrators to Taiwan. That was actually in the 1993 and the year 2000 version, but it has been removed now. And you see that the latest white paper, there's a lot of discussions on how to push for one country, two systems. So given that in Taiwan, obviously, it is not taken from a very positive side. We need to realize that, Taiwan is a functioning democracy. People have been electing their government for the past 2 to 3 decades. So with the idea of a possible, of such a threat coming from the PRC government, people are no doubt concerned. And on top of that, we are also seeing the Foreign Affairs Ministry in Taiwan. They just held an international press conference a few days ago. They have actually been calling out for international support for democracy against authoritarianism. They have been also stressing and hoping that countries could conduct freedom of navigation.
Well, we'll come to that if I may
Taiwan.
stop you. We'll come to that because I'm dividing this up into sections, if you don't mind. We're talking about reservists at the moment. We're talking about beefing up the military. Alexei, the countries are geographically very different, but both have seaports, and one of the issues for Ukraine has been, were they adequately defended? Do you think Taiwan can learn a lesson from the wounds inflicted on your country in that way?
I believe situation with Taiwan is much better because it's much better protected against blockade of seaports. Ukraine's ports were blocked at the beginning, and that was a big problem for us because of our grain export. It was very important for our economic income. But still we had a lot of linkages with our partners through the land. So it was compensated by this ground linkage with other types of transport. But what was important for Ukraine, we did not have any long-range missile to protect freedom of navigation. And it changed only with first arrival in Ukraine, this long-range missile for protection of ports like Harpoons and like this.
Okay, Ross, let me ask you this. Enough weaponry, missiles, etc., unlike Ukraine in the very early days, and better security and protection of trade routes, i.e. ports, etc. What do you think?
That's another issue that people in Taiwan have been debating nonstop for literally decades, sort of like the length of national service. You know, is the battle going to be here on Taiwan Island? And does that mean that Taiwan will be responding to air raids? Does it mean Taiwan will be responding to amphibious landings? Or does the fight really need to be in the Taiwan Strait or off the east, north, or south coasts of Taiwan? And that's where Taiwan needs to stop a Chinese invasion. Historically, Taiwan has purchased a lot of weapons that indicated they think they were going to fight a land war right here in the cities of Taiwan. Even within the last 5 years, Taiwan bought $1 billion of U.S. tanks. They've sought to buy howitzers, a deal that was canceled recently by the Biden administration. Now the buzzword is asymmetrical warfare. Let's take this to the air and to the sea, whether that's with missiles, as you indicated, more fighter aircraft, drones, but we got to keep them from landing or attacking Taiwan Island proper. That would involve a big change in thinking for the Taiwan military, and it's good that people are talking about this or thinking about this, but to change their doctrines and to spend a sufficient amount of money to make what people like to call this asymmetrical warfare a possibility, it'll take time. And Taiwan, frankly, might not have that time, especially with the speed or the lack thereof at which they make decisions.
Yeah, it's whether it has the time. And Ting Ting, I'm going to come to you after we've heard from somebody from the US Department of Defense, because Ross mentioned the Taiwan Straits, and so did he.
Clearly, the PRC is trying to coerce Taiwan. Clearly, they're trying to coerce the international community. And all I'll say is we're not going to take the bait, and it's not going to work. So it's a manufactured crisis. That doesn't mean we have to play into that. I think it would only play to Beijing's advantage. What we'll do instead is to continue to fly, to sail, and to operate wherever international law allows us to do so, and that includes in the Taiwan Strait. And we will continue to stand by our allies and partners in the region. And I think there's a lot of confidence in that U.S. commitment.
Two questions. He's suggesting business as usual. Is that provocation? And secondly, militarily, is Taiwan pretty well equipped to defend itself or not?
Okay, let me answer the first one on the freedom of navigation operations. So, the industry also a buzzword in Taiwan right now. People are watching whether the US will actually do send be it an aircraft carrier or be it any kind of vessels to cross the Taiwan Strait now. We are actually seeing the People's Liberation Army conducting a lot of joint air and naval exercises around Taiwan over the past few days, and it is still continuing right now. And the main thing is about crossing the middle line on Taiwan Strait. So previously, the PRC and Taiwan has this invisible line, median line that is on the Taiwan Strait, where both sides try to keep to their side of the Taiwan Strait, and it has actually maintained peace and status quo for over decades. But after Pelosi's visit with the military drill around Taiwan, PLA aircraft and vessels have been crossing this median line with the Chinese, claiming that this is part of their internal waters in that sense. This has also created a lot of discussion and a lot of caution in Washington, D.C.
Excuse me for doing this from thousands of miles away, but I agree that one of the difficulties that People's Republic of China might well have militarily is that Taiwan is such a craggy island that scaling those cliffs to get onto land, unless people are dropped in by parachute, would prove to be a difficult proposition, whereas in Ukraine, you just had to drive across the border.
Yes, so that's why we are actually looking at the PLA actively. They are building this large amphibious watercrafts, basically, these vessels, and many of them actually. And on top of that, they're actively building the aircraft carriers. We are actually seeing, like in May, when the PLA aircraft carrier Liaoning did conduct their military exercise on the east part of Taiwan. It was actually very watched closely by military experts here, because not only because of the duration of the warfare, duration of the military drill, where they came for at least a week outside the eastern part of Taiwan waters, and based on the Japanese defense military, the PLA has been actually pushing their aircraft multiple 200 times per day to take off on the aircraft carrier, and these are believed to be targeted towards the eastern bases in Taiwan. And on top of that, after that, the Liaoning aircraft carrier actually traveled towards the Western Pacific Ocean, and it was believed to practice to counter any foreign military aid possibly coming from the U.S. in Guam or from their Philippine bases in that sense. So going back to Taiwan, currently, even though we are actually receiving the latest F-16 CD Block 70, 66 of them earlier in 2023, but and Taiwan has actually a lot of military aircraft given at this point. But the problem is that as of Taiwan right now, we don't have the short takeoff or vertical takeoff kind of aircraft. And in Taiwan, the military bases or the air bases have been borne by the PLA. Whether this aircraft could effectively take off, this is one big question right now.
Okay. Well, Alexia, I'm going to come to you in just a moment. I haven't forgotten that you're there, but I want to go to Ross. That's after we've heard, because Ting Ting there was talking about the waters around Taiwan. Appropriate, therefore, that we should hear first of all from a retired naval captain.
China's goal is to psychologically threaten Taiwanese morale by shooting ballistic missiles over the Taiwan island, over Taipei, and showing pictures of Chinese warships and warplanes seemingly near our shorelines. But this doesn't seem to be working this time, because our stock market and foreign exchange did not crash like before during the 1995 and 1996 missile crisis.
Is he right that nobody appears to be panicking, at least financially? Because I've heard people are more worried about their investments than they are about actually having Chinese troops on the island in some cases.
Certainly in the past week, the threats that were made before Pelosi actually visited, after she left with these military exercises, it's very accurate to say it's been business as usual here in Taiwan. The financial markets have been operating smoothly. People going to work, people enjoying summer leisure activities. Frankly, by earlier this week, the military exercises weren't even a top news story. It might be the fourth or fifth story at the hourly news report on the major news networks here in Taiwan. So at some level, people are used to these threats, because China has threatened to use force against Taiwan for literally decades. There have been military exercises before. Although these exercises might be different, the length of time or the combined use of air, sea, and even land forces training on the Chinese mainland. But people are used to it, and they're going about their business, and the politicians talk about what Taiwan might need to do. Pundits like us are going on TV. American and Japanese politicians are talking about it.
Alexei, at the beginning of the conflict, Ukraine lost a lot of territory. You've said it's vital to try not to do that. Is that because, in terms of morale, it's very difficult once you've lost ground, or because it's very difficult to get it back?
It's difficult to get it back, and also it's very painful to have your relatives and your friends under occupation. It's a very difficult experience for the country when it's divided, and there are a lot of economic assets and a lot of population. In case of Ukraine, it's now millions of our citizens under temporary occupation. But what is very difficult is to get it back, because it's easier to defend. It's possible to defend territory. This system of territorial defense, it means people's defense with light weapons. But if you have to get it back, you have something heavy. You have to have aviation. You have to have heavy artillery like HIMARS and M777, and you have tanks. You have to have tanks and much more costly and difficult to get equipment. So it's better and easier to defend than to regain sovereign.
Yeah, I get it, Alexei. Thanks very much. I'll throw that one to Ting Ting. Are the people of Taiwan prepared, both in terms of the courage that they may have and in terms of the weaponry and resolve, to defend their streets bit by bit? Because getting it back, if you've lost it, as Alexei says, is a 10 times more difficult job.
Okay, now let's talk about the morale and the resilience part. I think one thing that of this military drill happening this time as compared to what happened in the 1995-1996 crisis is that it is quite apparent that it is either the people living in Taiwan has gotten so used to the threatenings from the PRC government, or basically, either they felt that they couldn't do much about it. So, that's a primary reason why the stock markets and currently, business seems to be happening as usual in Taiwan. And no doubt we have been seeing the government trying to stress that the people in Taiwan is very resilient psychologically, and then at least on the social media side, people are just as the normal. There wasn't any excessive fear you can feel that's happening on the ground in Taipei. But on whether people in Taiwan are ready militarily, there is a key question that military experts and analysts have been discussing extensively over the past 2 weeks, and this discussion has been happening for years. Yeah. That's what Ross said earlier.
Well, let me throw one at Ross, if I may, and that is, a lot of the talk has been about whether the United States will come in automatically, if you like, even though there's no particular treaty, would come in to defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion. Do you think that is expected in your part of Southeast Asia, or would they be looking to other regional allies such as Japan?
I think the assumption has long been that despite the so-called strategic ambiguity policy of the United States, that it would get involved. But if it's going to get involved, it's highly likely it will be on its own, maybe with Australia or Japan if Japan revises its constitution. It's extraordinarily unlikely that any ASEAN, Southeast Asian country would get involved. Their relationship with China, whether it's trade or other reasons, really precludes that. And if the United States is going to get involved, it better be very quickly, which presents other issues as well, whether the U.S. is coming from Japan or Guam or Hawaii or even the United States mainland. We've been talking about this territorial defense question and fighting in the streets. You mentioned earlier mountains in Taiwan. The mountains are in the center. Almost nobody lives up there. The bulk of the population in Taiwan is concentrated along the west coast and to a lesser extent on the east coast, which is at sea level. And the notion that people in Taiwan are going to fight in the streets, like we've seen, for example, in the suburbs of some of the major Ukraine cities or even the downtown, at this point in time, it borders on preposterous. So the fight is either going to be in the air or in the water, but it's probably not going to be on the streets of Taiwan.
Okay, well, one other lesson, Ting Ting, perhaps from Ukraine, is that you have to settle in for the long haul. It's 6 months pretty much since Russia crossed the border into Ukraine. Do you think the people of Taiwan would be prepared to go on standing up to any invaders for months, perhaps years, as in the case of Ukraine, some are suggesting?
I would say that from a general public point of view, I believe that Taiwanese are resilient, but whether they have the means to do it, this is the real question here. I think that based on not only the government but people I've been speaking to, they would actually want to maintain the democracy and the current way of living in Taiwan. There is no doubt. There's people here. They stress that they like peace and they do not want war. But it really boils down to the day that it did happen, the D-Day it did happen. I believe that people in Taiwan will fight for our own sovereignty in that sense. But whether people are trained enough to do it, my concern is that people are far away from that.
Okay, so the will may be there, but the expertise may not. Listen, thank you. Contrasting experiences in Ukraine with possible outcomes, if and when in Taiwan. We thank you very much indeed from a military, from a risk perspective, and from the Ukrainian perspective for coming on this program. Much appreciated. Thank you wherever you're watching this edition of Roundtable. For now, from me, David Foster, goodbye.